Welcome to this very special episode of our program, Daily Debate. Today we are celebrating a very special occasion that all Egyptians, all together, celebrate, Sham al-Nasim. This very special occasion, this occasion that comes right after the celebrations of the Easter, and definitely it comes in or within the holy month of Ramadan. So we are all celebrating together the mood of festivities that we are in those days, very blessed days. Despite this relation between Sham al-Nasim and Christianity, it also goes back to some of the very Egyptian traditions, and definitely the history of Sham al-Nasim and the history of the Easter has its own traditions. That what we will be speaking about. We'll be also speaking about how we have this festivity mood among all the Egyptians. We will be speaking about how Egyptians all together have learned to celebrate together, how the coexistence that goes within the veins of Egyptians. Will be speaking about that and more, and how the world is looking to us, and how about tourism. We'll be speaking about all that in our very special episode tonight. Before we delve into our discussion, let me first welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Khalifa, international tourism expert. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. And I don't know, let me say happy holy month of Ramadan, happy Easter, happy Sham al-Nasim.
It's indeed a month of festivities, and we have very important festivals, very important to local Egyptians, and they're actually not modern. They're taken not even from the time of Christianity, it's even before that. So we're talking about some of the oldest known feasts for the Egyptians for nearly 4,700 years old now.
Let me take this from you. And today is Sham al-Nasim, that comes right after the Easter.
Yes,
and
1 week after Easter.
It's the Eastern, or the Eastern Sham al-Nasim, because, or the Eastern Easter, because
yeah, different one, yeah, from the Western one. Yes,
indeed.
It is just a matter of calendars, different calendars. So that's because we do have two different types of calendars. As you know, there's a Coptic calendar and the Gregorian calendars. So that's hence you find the difference.
Very much indeed. But here Sham al-Nasim has special features, and it dates back to the pharaonic times, and as you said, respectively, and it heralded the coming...
Let me tell you something about it. The feast, perhaps a lot of people don't know this. I talk about tourism all the time, and I talk about marketing tourism all the time.
We'll be speaking about that.
But also I have a background, a very strong historical background, and I know the history of this country very well. The feast started as nearly as 2700 BC. You're talking about nearly a feast that we're celebrating today that's 4,700 years old. The feast started with the celebration of the summer, of the beginning of the summer in ancient Egypt, and it was called the Feast of Shimu. And the word Shimu in ancient Egyptian language means the beginning of the summer, or the summer season. So that's how the feast started, and it was actually a religious feast in which gods were presented with some offerings, and the offerings were included the salted fish and onion to be presented to specific... And eggs were added later on. Okay? And an egg it's the beginning of inception, beginning of creation. And it was a symbol at that time. And but we found evidence at that time that they used to celebrate this feast, and they used to have the exact same features. When Christianity came to Egypt nearly 2,500 years later, what happens is that it continued celebrating the same feast. Even when Islam hit later on, 600 years later, it was a common feast because it was taken in a pre-Christian and pre-Islamic times. It was a feast for everyone to celebrate. And until this very day, We're still celebrating the feast of the Shimu or Shem Nisim. And the nice thing is that even the word translated into like the, breathing the breeze. So it is the beginning of a new season. It is the end. It is a continuation of a beautiful feast that was celebrated in ancient Egypt a long time ago.
Since we're speaking about one feature in our life, or one festival, or this occasion, let me know, or let me show our audience, or let our audience aware of the traditions of celebrations of such occasion, so that people would really celebrate with us.
One of the most important thing about that feast is that not only that people share the same meals, or they go out to the feast and to the different gardens and they celebrate it. The thing is that it is not really, you can't tell this is a feast that belongs to a certain religion. So it's a feast for everybody. And it's a continuation of an ancient feast that was celebrated by the ancestors. And that one gives it the beauty. People love the fact that they go out to the gardens at that day to celebrate this new season. And it comes within a month of festivities of the Christian Easter feast. Normally it comes 1 week after Easter. Right, the first Shem Nisim always comes like the first Sunday after Easter. So it is indeed a time for Egyptians to rejoice. Easter. And yes, the time for Egyptians to rejoice, time for celebration, time to go out. It is indeed something that a lot of Egyptians are maintaining the celebration, features of that feast by having the beautiful eggs and the colorful eggs and the salted fish, and the herring and many other things. The same thing as their ancestors used to do.
And that was exactly what I was going to ask you. How different traditions of celebrations
not very much.
Really?
No, really, not very much. I mean, on that feast, the Shimu feast, they used to give a lot of offerings to the gods, and which is the exact same offerings that we're giving to ourselves nowadays, and out in the gardens where we are, celebrating with our families and have a time out, and eat salted fish, and especially this same kind of Nile fish or a gray mullet fish that they used to salt, and I call it the mummified fish. So it's a fish that has been, kept and salted for a long time, but it's a
mummified fish.
Yes, it is because it died out. But a lot of people prefer also to have herring during their feast. We keep telling tourists about it, and they love it. They love the fact that they share these moments.
Exactly. This is why I'm just putting or making a focus on the traditions themselves, because each country has its own traditions, particularly in festivities.
Of course.
If I may ask you about the celebrations of Shem Nisim from one governorate to another. And do they differ, or we all celebrate in the same way? I mean, here does Upper Egypt, for instance, differ from Alexandria, or the Delta, from the center of Egypt, Cairo, and all the surroundings? Tell me about how do different Egyptians celebrate this?
Well, my opinion, people in Egypt nowadays are not having almost the same traditions. Each governorate to each part of Egypt, especially the north, is a little different than the south when it comes to local traditions. And but they all share the same thing. They all go out into the gardens. They all celebrate it. Some of them, they show more moods of celebration than others. and the ones down in the south are much more higher in temperature than those in the north. So those in the north go mostly to the shores and the beaches, and maybe they take like sea rides. The ones that down in the south, they're more celebrated at night. They don't have to like go out in the middle of the heat. So there is like different patterns of celebration. But at the end of the day, it is something inherited from the ancestors, 4,500 or 4,700 years ago, and is still maintained, still celebrated, no matter what your religion is, what your color is, no matter what your language is. You live in Egypt, you celebrate Shem Nessim.
Indeed. It is a kind of national festival more than it is a religious one.
Yes.
And that is unique in itself, because it shows the entity or the identity of Egyptians. And that is something that we want to pinpoint our fingers on, because coexistence has always been one feature in our lives as Egyptians. Let me know more about that.
Egypt is always, in history, is a pot for all religions, all types of religions and all types of invaders. This is a country where invaders and people from other cultures came in and melted into this pot. And they all became Egyptians. And if they don't become Egyptians, they Egyptianize themselves. And this is what happened since the time of the Ptolemies, the Romans, to the Arabs, to everyone came in here. They wanted to Egyptianize themselves. It was the right weather, the right climate, the best environment. There is a river where all civilizations are normally flourish next to a river. And they had tremendous amount of resources that they can't find anywhere else. So there is also a tremendous amount of knowledge and innovative knowledge that have been kept in this country for a long time ago. So no matter what happens, when people here come and coexist, whether they're different cultures, different races, different religions, they always coexist. There's never been a time where they were being divided because of any of these things. Even during the Greek-Roman times, they've never been divided. Even when the Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptians, and the Jews, and everyone, were living in one pot together, they never were in disagreement. So they were always coexisting. They were always follow the same traditions, of burial. They always had mummification. They always had the same kind of food. They always had the same kind of traditions that we have today. And then other countries started to take out these things and learn from us. This was the country that thousands of years ago people used to dream to immigrate to.
Have you noticed?
Wanted to go. If you take a higher education somewhere around in the vicinity, in the region, and maybe 600, 700, 800, 900 years ago, and you want to go to a spot where you can be bragging among your friends that you've lived in that spot, you would say, I would go to Egypt. This is the country, even since the time of the pharaohs, time of the Mesopotamians, time of the Phoenicians, from the Persians, all of them, they knew how sophisticated this country at one time was. This is the country where history was born. This is where we added to humanity, and it's going to still like this. And right now we take so much pride that we have different cultures and different religions. And today the two main religions in Egypt, Christianity and Islam. And Islam, of course, is the majority. We have nearly, most of the majority, but most of those Muslims in Egypt, they love their Christian Egyptians, because the Christian Egyptians have been there always. Those are the Egyptians, as much as they have the same rights, and we enjoy celebrating their feast. And trust me, Christians, many of them enjoy so much, sharing the celebration of Muslims, especially in Ramadan. Many of them share in iftar, many of them share on free banquets, for any passers-by. And they serve, they help. We celebrate Christmas you know, and we celebrate many of the very important feasts, and we have some feasts together, like the Shimu feast or Shamanism.
Shamanism,
Yes.
this year.
Yes.
So this year, it comes in parallel with the holy month of Ramadan, and definitely Easter, because it comes right after the Easter. The features that we have seen of festivities, you know, during the holy month of Ramadan, we have seen some a beautiful festivity mood of, like, you've seen the iftar or this gathering that many governorates has carried out with. It started with districts and then it moved on to be in governorates. Those festivities, how you as a tourist expert, how does this present Egypt to the world, or how the world see Egypt from such
it's not only
festivities?
seeing Egypt in such a time, it's just, this is the way how international tourism focuses nowadays. International tourism nowadays have shifted towards more adventurous, more discovering, more cultural based, and more touching of the local cultures of the people. If you don't travel to a country without learning anything about it, without learning about its people, its traditions, about its culinary, taste, like try their food, try their cuisine, know how things are done, see how they are, their habits, enjoy, cook in their kitchens. If you don't see these countries doing festivals, carnivals, if you don't mingle with those locals, you learn nothing. And that's not the modern trend of tourism. Tourism, it's all about all of these things. This is why I'm telling you, if we do have a lot of these, I would say, these features that would bring so much joy to the international traveler. If we focus on them, if we engage those people, if you remember many years back, American ambassador used to go and attend a lot of these local religious festivals in Oriya, for example.
Actually,
right?
we have seen this time with the Korean
at the moment,
ambassador.
the Korean ambassador is going to Matariya, and celebrating. This is the joy of international travel. This is the cheering people, spending time with people, sharing their culture, understanding them better. And this is what international travelers nowadays do. And thank God we have very cultural and well-informed Egyptologist tourist guides who do not only speak about history and Egyptology in Egypt, but also they speak about local cultures. And when they explain these things to to the international travelers, it wrapped them up with a good flavor of discovery. And that's how travelers all the time like to go back to Luxor again, like to go back to Aswan again, like to experience the things that they've experienced, the Nubians, for example, the things that they experienced, with the locals in Luxor for the West Bank, for example. You always find this kind of a cultural touch that brings the international traveler back again. It's like a magnet that brings them back again to the destination.
Here it's a kind of cross-culture. Mm-hmm. So it's how people grasp the culture of the other at large. I mean here that when we travel outside, we grasp the culture of the other, but when they come here, there is the same sense of wanting to know more. And that in itself is something very interesting. And I've noticed lots and lots of tourists who were very much interested in going to local places and sitting in cafes, the very oriental Egyptian places. The foundation of tourism in Egypt is really based on the number of multiple factors, most notably those related to cultural values, geographical diversity, history, heritage, and that in itself is giving Egypt a certain unique flavor. From your point of view, how is the government making efforts to use such ancient Egyptian festivities to promote for tourism and what kind of efforts?
I'm not following these efforts, but all what I'm saying is that I can see that local people living in this country are very hospitable, very generous, and there would be no opportunity that would be without having to invite international travelers or foreigners, you know, to their banquets, to their festivals, and sharing these beautiful moments. But I have no doubt that at some point when like ministers of tourism or the Egyptian Tourist Promotion Authority would have spared no efforts to help, you know, promoting for this feast, of course, in international fairs, and try to get people to attend these carnivals that are happening in various areas in Egypt nowadays. I'm sure that this will be an experience that will be practiced for decades, since international tourism have shifted towards learning and discovery.
If we get back to Shamanism, and if we get back to the atmosphere of blessed days, because these are very blessed days, and this it gives a reflection to this special and unique nature of relationship between Egyptians. Unity. Unity among Egyptians has been one of the features of the Egyptian identity. And how is that important? Because that is another face of those festivities, by the way. How is that important? How do the world view that through our festivities together? And how does that give us a unique...
That is the norm, Mona. This is the norm. When you have cultured people that live side to side with each other, when there are laws that
Actually,
are not...
it's not the norms, because in other countries you are aware that those
But that
things...
is supposed to be happening. What I'm saying is that it's supposed to be happening. Other countries, perhaps they have different religions together with different languages. What we did here, this is not like new immigrants that are going to a country like to Europe, for example, to some European countries, and then locals would feel like we have new immigrants. They come with their own tradition. They're not mingling within the society, or they're bringing their own religion and their own practices and everything. This is totally different. This is how the West is looking into it and within other countries. But there are countries in the Middle East that have an establishment of a strong belief in the country as a land, as a place that lives within them, regardless of their color, of their language, of their religion, of their beliefs and everything. And this is something that you always find in the Middle East. Muslims and Christians coexisted here for nearly 1,400 years. That's a long time. That's not 200 years. That's not 300. That's 1,400 years. And this is a time in a country where people coexist, that share the same thing, have the same thing. Islam and Christianity, even before Egypt, or before we talk about this coexistence in Egypt, Islam and Christianity have also coexisted. Even in Saudi Arabia, you know, when Prophet Muhammad immigrated from Mecca and went to Medina, who was living in Medina at the time? Christians and Jews. And they open up their doors, they receive the early refugees, the early Muslims, you know, they give them shelter. And they stayed there for 20 years. Even when Prophet Muhammad went back to Mecca after 20 years, after three main campaigns of wars that were waged against him in Medina. After 20 years, he went back to Mecca again, and that's when he freed everyone in Mecca. But he didn't decide to stay all in Mecca. He went back to Medina and stayed there, and he's buried in Medina. He's not buried in Mecca.
Yes, indeed.
So that shows you how all these religions coexisted, even from the beginning of this religion, even from Islamic religion is a very tolerant religion in its nature, and Christianity is exactly the same. Christianity is one of the most tolerant religions, you know. And the two religions coexisted together. They both share things together. They share beliefs together. They share the same prophets together. They believe in the same prophets. They believe in the same God. So, and it's the same thing as Judaism as well. So I'm not surprised that people share things together. They speak the same language. They can easily coexist. When you find problems with when religions clash with each other, it's mostly mixed with politics, mostly mixed with one group wanted to have a power over another group. But if you left it to the local people, they coexist together. Look at India. How many religions are there? 1,300 religions in India, you know, and the people are coexisting together. You know, look at many different countries around the world. People are coexisting, but we are the long-lasting coexisting country that had those two religions, you know, embedded together and living together in one place. And we have churches as old as the 4th century AD, and we have monasteries that are as old as the 2nd century AD. We even invented monasticism. We have the oldest known mosques. You know, most of the members of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam of his family are mostly buried in Egypt.
Yes.
You know, they're not buried in you know, some of them buried in Saudi Arabia, but most of them are buried in Egypt. So what are we talking about? We're talking about this kind of coexisting, and it's going to be coexisting until Judgment Day. And I can tell you, this is the thing that makes this country so strong. I'll give you a little example. I don't want to take too much of your time.
No, exactly. Please take it, because we're speaking about a very important point.
You just reminded me of something that I went to in 2010, and I lived in one of the new compounds out in the desert. And the developer of that compound was just building every 2 years a mosque and a mosque and a mosque and a mosque in every new area that they opened. And so we were there among the first early few hundreds of people who went to live there in that compound. And then we decided that we have enough mosques. What about if we build a church for our local brothers? You know, for the brothers who live with us, for those, yes, their number was smaller, but they deserve one. And so what we did as Muslims, we made a petition, and we give it to the developer and saying, hey, why don't you dedicate a piece of land to build a church? Because we have enough mosques. And we did that, and then when we found no response, what we did is that we pressured them over social media. We made a group, and people start talking about it. And then we met them once and twice until 1 year later, they dedicated a big piece of land to build that church. And just last year, they had that church reopened, you know, when the community of Christians, became big. And I was so proud that when we fight for each other in terms of, like, we love for each other things, and we love the existence of having a mosque and a church and a synagogue, whatever, it shows that peace and love should be spreading in this country, and it gives a very positive message to the rest of the world.
Exactly. And certainly I was not very much speaking into the religion as I was speaking into politics, because I was asking how the world sees this spirit. This spirit exists. So we don't have to
I don't think the world would have any issue, because
no,
when you have international travelers, when they come here, they see it, and they see it very well. They see how things are mixing up.
What I'm speaking about here is that spirit that exists, the spirit of coexistence and the spirit of festivity. Let's take it from festivities. But it also comes in face of crises. Yes. Because we manage crises altogether.
Of course, look what happened after 2013, and when there was a lot of Christian churches have been burned down. Look what how local Christian Egyptians looked to it. You know, they understood, they lived, they know that this is their country. They never felt alienated. They knew that this is could happen as much as it could happen to them. It could happen to their brothers, to their Muslims who live in the same land. So there's a lot of things we passed through, many difficult times. Look at the famines that used to take in Egypt during the early Islamic times. You know, there were Christians and Muslims. They went through the same famines. Look at the plagues that they used to, you know, hit this country every now and then. It's the same thing. People lived. You never find a country where religion is really coexisting and melting so much, and people practice and live the tradition of each other, except Egypt. Egypt is like amazing in this regard. You know, there were a lot of Muslims, you know, back in the 1700 and 1800, they used to go and visit, or still until today, you know, they go to monasteries and we still have that kind of passion, you know, towards anything that relates to these religions, because you can't be a Muslim without believing in Christianity and Judaism.
Yes. Before we move on with
Yes.
our discussion, let me first have this quick report. And millions of Egyptians celebrate Easter across Egypt. Let's watch how they celebrate.